Good morning and welcome to the South Dublin County Development Plan Review webinar. My name is Stephen Willoughby. I'm a Senior Executive Planner here in South Dublin County Council, working within the Forward Planning section. I'm joined by my colleague Hazel Craigie, who's the Senior Planner and Project Lead in the County Development Plan Review, and Hazel will provide a brief overview of the County Development Plan Review process shortly. Firstly, we look at the purpose of today's webinar. The purpose today is to provide a brief overview and discuss a number of the strategic issues which have been identified in the Plan Review consultation booklet and County Development Plan website. The idea of the webinar is to stir the thought processes and inform your submission to the County Development Plan. You'll see displayed on your screen now the consultation booklet and website. And the purpose of the webinar today and format is pre-recorded presentations, which will be played live, and then we have a live panel discussion for 5 minutes on each of the topics. Joining Hazel and I today, we have a distinguished panel of experts eagerly waiting to discuss the strategic issues for the next County Development Plan. On the panel today, we have Marguerite Staunton, our SEO in Housing, Therese Pender, Senior Executive Architect, Chris Galvin, Senior Engineer in Climate Action, John Joe Hegarty, Senior Executive Engineer in Transportation, Paul McIlerney, Senior Staff Officer in the Community Section, Suzanne Furlong, Senior Park Superintendent in Public Realm, Laura Leonard, our SEO in Economic Development, and Rosaline Dwyer, our Heritage Officer. I'll now hand you over to Hazel, who will provide a brief overview of the County Development Plan process.
Thanks, Stephen, and welcome to those who have joined us today. This webinar is part of the pre-draft consultation stage as we start the preparation of our new County Development Plan. This consultation phase commenced on the 31st of July and it'll run for 8 weeks up until the 28th of September. This stage of the process is all about the big issues facing the county and the direction that we want to take. The new County Development Plan, when adopted in 2022, will set out the framework to guide development up to 2028. We aren't starting from scratch. The current development plan has set in place a strong foundation which has guided and facilitated the delivery of new housing, employment, community facilities and amenities throughout the county. It has also set policy towards the protection and enhancement of the existing built and natural heritage. Our new plan must develop policies to further enhance this progress over the next 6-year plan cycle. The new County Development Plan will set in place the key steps which will direct, connect and shape the future development of the county up to 2040. We hope your participation in this webinar will help to broaden the discussion on the key issues which have to be addressed in the next plan, and we very much look forward to your input. I will hand you back to Stephen now as we start the first presentation.
Thanks for that, Hazel. And just before we begin with the live pre-recorded presentations and live panel discussion, just to note that to the top right of your screen there's a Q&A facility within the live event where we're looking for people to post their views and opinions on the key opportunities and challenges facing the next County Development Plan up to 2028. The Q&A will be managed by John and Tracy, who will aim to respond directly to your queries and group issues arising for the panel to discuss.
Thank you for joining this webinar.
Once all 7 presentations have been completed, the panel will endeavour to discuss as many of the issues raised from the Q&A as possible. We'll now begin with the first presentation which Hazel has prepared on population growth and housing. I see we have some questions coming in already, which is good to see. If people can keep posting those questions, John and Tracy will endeavour to kind of address your queries, and the panel will discuss all questions and issues at the end of the panel discussions.
Joining this webinar, and welcome to everyone. I am going to set the context for our development plan in terms of population growth and housing. The South Dublin County Development Plan sits within a wider hierarchy of plans. Our target population is set by the National Planning Framework and the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy. South Dublin is targeted with facilitating an additional 50,000 population between 2016 and 2031. If we assume an average household size of 2.75 persons, that would equate to a requirement for 1,200 new homes annually. The development plan must identify where this growth is to go. At both national and regional level, achieving effective density and consolidation rather than urban sprawl is a top priority. To achieve compact growth, we need to target infill and brownfield lands in existing built-up areas. The key growth centres for South Dublin are the SDZs at Adamstown and Clonburris, lands at Kilcarbery and Fortunestown, and the regeneration areas at Tala and the Nace Road, Ballymount. As we grow, we need to provide the required infrastructure and facilities to create vibrant places to live and work which are sustainable in the long term. In assessing our housing needs, we will review the existing baseline. At the last census in 2016, South Dublin had 70% owner-occupied housing, the national average. We had slightly above average social rented and below average private rented. Our household size is larger than average. South Dublin has a lower percentage of apartments compared to the Dublin region. Our population is young on average, but as with the general population, is increasingly ageing. Baseline data on housing, infrastructure and the capacity of our land will provide an evidence base for the zoning of land to meet our population targets. Our core strategy will include a settlement hierarchy outlining the planned growth for different areas. Having a strong evidence base, we can determine at a strategic level the type of infrastructure, community, physical infrastructure and green infrastructure that we need to ensure that the places we live are all part of a carefully planned, sustainable community for South Dublin.
Thanks for that presentation, Hazel. I suppose the first question, just in terms of compact growth, what are the likely strategic areas for growth over the next plan period, and what do we mean by compact growth?
Thanks, Stephen. That's a good question. Essentially, when we're talking about compact growth, we are looking to reduce this pattern of urban sprawl that has evolved over the last decades, I suppose now. So what we want to do is concentrate growth into key centres, which will then allow us to live closer to the services we need and reduce the whole need to commute. It also has other advantages in that we can focus our investment on in these areas so that we can kind of maximise the existing infrastructure investment that's in there, and also obviously concentrate new infrastructure into those areas. And, you know, I think a good example of that is our public transport, where we can try to improve our public transport, but we need a certain carrying capacity or kind of level of growth before that becomes feasible. In terms of South Dublin, our key growth areas are going to be at Adamstown and Clonburris, which are we already have existing frameworks for development for those areas under what's called strategic development zones. We have regeneration areas in Tala and the Nace Road, and then we have areas in Fortunestown and Kilcarbery, all of which are targeted for growth.
That's great, thanks for that, Hazel. And just touching on the points that Hazel raised there, John Joe, relating to transport, what resources are needed to serve these growth areas?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I'll echo what Hazel has said. There are a number of engineering services required in order to support development growth in an area. The transport ones are road access, pedestrian footpaths, cycle path extensions and connections to public transport, and public lighting and car parking provision. There are also other services like mains water, stormwater, wastewater management and electrical services to be provided. These costs are significant in proportion to the total cost of any development. So therefore, building closer to existing services or regenerating infill urban areas reduces the lengths of the extensions of these services that we need to make. So if, for example, if a road is close and it's got spare capacity, we simply have to connect short connections to the existing road network. If there are existing bottlenecks and congestions in an area, a new road might be necessary, but that will cost more money. Similarly, if we build near good transport routes. This will cater for more of the journeys that will be generated by the development. The advantages of compact growth with a good mix of development means that, growth or development like shops and schools and workplaces, if they're close to the residential, it shortens the journeys that are necessary. And this is good news for active travel like walking and cycling. Also, we require to make good permeability from each development. And what that means is multiple accesses, for example, road accesses, so that traffic is not all coming onto one road and causing congestion. And also there might be desire lanes to amenities, etc. And obviously, like I said, we need to keep journeys short to encourage walking and cycling. So really, our aims in transport is providing supporting infrastructure to encourage growth, to encourage active travel and the use of public transport, and to reduce car use where possible. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks for that, John-Joe. Just on that topic again, Marguerite, just from the housing section's perspective, like what challenges are we facing in the next development plan in terms of the delivery of new housing?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Just to say that, from a housing perspective, we would need to see that there's sufficient zoned lands for residential at appropriate locations to satisfy the housing requirements of the county. Now, I know Hazel mentioned Adamstown and Clonburris, so into the future, but even going beyond that, we need to look at what zoned land we have. But also we need to focus on the changing demographic factors such as decline in our average household size and increasing number of people over 65. So we need to build houses for these specific needs and to facilitate a diverse range of dwelling types. Affordability is a big challenge. And with this in mind, South Dublin County Council have plans in progress to build affordable units at different locations with large mixed tenure sites located at Kilcarbery, at Killinarden and Clonburris. But also the other big issue would be funding. And this is going to be a challenge into the future for investment in both private and in public housing. We would also, a challenge is, we're building houses, or we're building units for various different types of people. We need to ensure and to promote social integration and to build sustainable communities. And finally, quality design is also important, because we want our housing to last and be sustainable into the future. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great, Marguerite. Thanks for that. All important factors which we'll have to consider in the review of the county development plan. And just from Chris, just from a climate action perspective, what are the key challenges in your area in accommodating this level of growth?
Yes, Stephen, I suppose one of the main issues that climate change is bringing with us is some more extreme weather events. And I suppose particularly in urban areas, extreme rainfall events are challenging, and the management of the surface water that's produced by these events in a way that doesn't cause flooding either locally or downstream of the development, but also that protects our rivers and streams from pollution. So sustainable drainage is one of the methods that we use for doing this, and trying to bring in a more nature-based solution and mimic what nature would have done. So we're trying to include things like swales, integrated constructed wetlands, tree pits, and those type of pieces of infrastructure. But that's a key challenge, particularly in our denser sites, to fit in this infrastructure and make it work. So I suppose back to what was mentioned earlier about good quality design, we need to ensure that the design of the surface water management and the effects of more difficult weather conditions that we're getting in recent times are dealt with at an early stage and are involved in a holistic design approach for these sites. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great, Chris. Thanks for that. So that concludes our population and housing growth presentation and discussion. We'll move on to our second presentation, which relates to built environment and placemaking, which is being prepared by Eddie Conroy, our county architect.
Hello. We've already heard that the core strategy of the development plan is designed to locate new development where it should be, adjoining mass transport employment, and optimising underused land in existing built-up areas. To generate viable communities, we must build meaningful new places, diverse, lively, sustainable and convenient. Good master plans, like traditional towns, will create a connecting pattern of busy streets and squares and include existing landscapes and waterways in attractive parks and gardens. Good street and public space design will encourage cycling and walking as a natural and easy alternative to car use, linking homes to schools, shops, community facilities and workspaces. Busy streets are safe streets. A mix of different street types, boulevards, avenues, linear parks, lanes make for a more interesting and legible neighbourhood, encouraging different building uses and types and public interaction. From small courtyard gardens to large public squares, urban spaces must be hospitable, sunny, sheltered, balancing high-quality building and paving materials with appropriate planting and trees. The pedestrian should hold sway, and care should be taken to avoid car-dominated environments. It is a challenge to make a public place where the community can gather. COVID-19 has made gathering in this manner impossible in the last 6 months, but has surely reinforced our need to create meaningful space to celebrate events, memories, and shared values. These spaces must be responsive to new needs and new types of events. Changing population and family arrangements has meant that housing demand is not just growing, but becoming much more diverse in terms of need. Whether you are young or old, married, single or newly single, a much broader range of housing type, size and tenure is now essential. More flexible building design solutions, incorporating houses, terraces, duplexes, apartments and, where appropriate, taller buildings are required to facilitate a responsive range of purchase and rental solutions, whether that be private, affordable or social in nature. They must also respond to the logic of the compact urban neighbourhood, delivering medium density, street-based arrangements, optimising orientation, access, usable private space, both individual and shared, in a high-quality residential environment. This is a long way from simplistic discussions about houses versus apartments. These new typologies must be underpinned by the quality of the homes delivered. Universal access, near zero low energy usage and ventilation requirements will be guaranteed under the standards of the building regulations. Sunshine, daylight, well-planned rooms opening to usable open space, adequate storage and usable workspace cannot be compromised in the search for compact development. Quality must be fought for through planning development management if these urban neighbourhoods are to generate desirable homes and become livable communities. Thank you.
Thanks to Eddie for that presentation. Unfortunately, Eddie couldn't be with us today, but Therese thankfully has offered to step in. So the first question, Eddie mentioned in the presentation, Therese, the discussion around houses versus apartments and that we're moving away from that. What did he mean by that?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I think up until now there's been a view that one type of person lives in an apartment and another lives in a house, but this is often an oversimplification. Many of us have different housing needs at different stages of our lives, and this is reflected in the demographic around household size. Lots of people are in houses too large, more are seeking suitable homes, and there's an increasing demand for 1 and 2 bedroom dwellings. Uprooting people from one community to another presents barriers. So new typologies which create integrated communities are needed. As mentioned by Eddie, we need subtleties of typology as opposed to a linear divide between housing and apartments. Smaller townhouses, duplexes, own-door apartments all offer solutions alongside the more traditional housing and apartments. Affordability, as Marguerite mentioned earlier, is a massive challenge here, and the range of options with access to a range of facilities is essential to creating these sustainable communities. I think we all recognise what a successful community is, but if you look at the common ingredients, it's often well-connected communities which offer facilities and amenities, and these need to be the kind of communities which we are creating. And COVID has brought this into more focus than ever before, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Therese. I suppose just mentioned earlier on in Hazel's presentation, the whole area of compact growth. Just from an architectural and urban design perspective, what are the challenges on your end in achieving compact growth?
Yeah. Well, the compact growth, as discussed earlier, is key to the generation of new communities, large and small. And it's critical that all the schemes respond to existing context. So obviously on small sites and built up areas, that's a huge driver. It's more challenging, however, I suppose in the regeneration zones outlined by Hazel earlier. But this is where the core strategy of this development plan, supported by local area plans and master plans, are critical so that the communities emerge in a kind of a coherent manner. Developers like to develop incrementally, and these master plans secure links and amenities so that they're delivered appropriately with the proper connections and appropriate densities. And Eddie touched on this, but complex arrangements of tenure with social, affordable, private, and then purchasing and rental dwellings, all developing within a single kind of scheme. The underlying architecture needs to be sufficiently complex to enable this diversity. And increasingly, people's expectations of design has become more sophisticated. Everyone wants a bright, well-appointed, spacious apartment, and the delivery of these schemes must develop to suit this modern standard of living. So,
that's great. Thanks for that, Therese. Just from a natural heritage perspective, Rosaleen, how can natural heritage be integrated into the design and layout of these urban spaces?
Sorry, hello, Stephen. I think it's about starting at the very earliest point in the design process. The first step is to survey what's on the site to begin with. That survey should identify any habitat or species or any ecologically sensitive area that would need to be protected. And this allows the design and the overall plan for the development then to incorporate those elements into the development. And I mean, getting started at the earliest stage when there's an idea of development is key. Once a design has formed, it's a bit, it's harder at that stage to go back and try and incorporate what's already on the site. Now, if there isn't very much on the site to begin with, as in, it's not very ecologically sensitive or very rich, there's an opportunity at that point to see how additional biodiversity could actually be incorporated or introduced onto the site. And then at that stage as well, it's a good idea to look at how the site relates to sites adjacent to it, so that this concept of a green infrastructure network can be strengthened.
That's great. Thanks for that, Rosaleen. And just from your perspective, Laura, and economic development, does good placemaking have a role in attracting investment into the county?
Very much so, Stephen. What I would say is, in respect to foreign direct investment, the big companies coming in here, one of the key drivers for them is attraction of talent and a pool of talent. So to foster that and to facilitate that within our county, nice places to live, the all-important placemaking is crucial. And then if you cascade that down to those actual communities, those actual places that are to a very high standard and offer us sustainability in the longer term, will attract then the service business, the retail business, and in that way you're creating a diverse range of jobs. And I do absolutely, the high standard of placemaking is very key to that.
That's great. Thanks for that, Laura. And Hazel, just from the plan side, kind of, how can we encourage good placemaking in the development plan?
Yes, Stephen, there are so many elements that go to make up good placemaking, and I think that's become clear just from our previous speakers and what they have said. And development plans cover a huge range of issues, and that's where the whole placemaking comes into play, I suppose. So, for instance, the development plan will encourage this compact growth model, and that in itself has the potential for really good placemaking by allowing for the services and amenities we need to be close to where we live. It allows us to walk and cycle to places, which is so much better than getting into a car and having to drive everywhere. And similarly, we will have standards for open space, for green infrastructure, standards for urban design, all of which will encourage that whole good placemaking element and make sure, as Laura said, that we can attract the people into the county to increase our employment and basically increase the whole economic ability of our county. So those are the key ways. I mean, really, as I say, it's so cross-cutting that everything we do in the development plan will have an influence on placemaking, and we will very much have that in mind as we go start developing policies to put into the plan.
That's great. Thanks Hazel for that, and thanks to everyone for their input on that topic. We'll now move on to our next presentation, which is on climate action and was prepared by Chris Galvin, Senior Engineer in Climate Action.
My name is Chris Galvin, and I'm going to speak to you about climate action, energy and infrastructure on the County Development Plan. Climate change is recognised as a significant global environmental problem. Since the Industrial Revolution, economic growth and development has been matched by increasing levels of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. Evidence of this can be seen in the changes to average global temperature, sea level rise, increased rainfall intensity and rainfall patterns, increased flooding and other extreme weather events such as cold snaps and heat waves. Climate change is affecting people from every walk of life. In 2016, Ireland joined 188 other nations in signing the Paris Agreement. This was to pursue efforts to limit global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the century. All aspects of government policy are now underpinned by a commitment to climate action. In 2015, the government published the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act to provide a statutory basis for the national transition objectives. The National Climate Action Plan 2019 identified actions across key sectors, including electricity, transport, built environment, industry and agriculture, and presents a path towards achieving our decarbonisation goals. The Climate Action Plan recognises the role that land use and spatial planning can play in providing for population growth in a compact, connected and sustainable way to reduce our carbon footprint. The range of measures to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and tackle climate change include both mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation measures are those aimed to reduce the current and future greenhouse gas emissions, such as reducing energy consumption, switching to renewable energy sources and carbon sequestering. Adaptation consists of actions that will reduce the impacts of climate change that are happening right now and those in the future. Action such as changes in land use, emergency response and continuity planning are all adaptation actions. In response to the challenges facing our county, South Dublin County Council developed our Climate Change Action Plan 2019 to 24. The Climate Change Action Plan examines our legal obligations as a local authority and the national targets that we agree to, and defines our strategy to advance the organisation towards a sustainable and zero carbon future. The targets defined in the Climate Change Action Plan are to improve the Council's energy efficiency, reduce the Council's greenhouse gas emissions, make Dublin a climate resilient region by reducing the impacts of future climate related events, and actively engaging and informing our citizens on climate change. The Climate Plan has 130 actions developed across a number of key areas. The areas identified are energy and buildings, transport, flood resilience, nature-based solutions, resource management and citizen engagement. In terms of climate change and land use planning, the County Development Plan plays an important role in influencing a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by guiding the sustainable development of our county. This is done by encouraging more compact, mixed-use developments and greater use of sustainable transport options, such as cycling, walking and public transport, and by restricting development in areas that are at risk of flooding and protecting natural landscapes and biodiversity. This can also be done by promoting the use of renewable energy sources, which will benefit communities and significantly reduce carbon emissions. We must manage our water resources through sustainable drainage systems and help to prevent flooding while benefiting biodiversity also. Working together through proper planning, we can reduce our impact on climate change in order to contribute towards the development of sustainable and resilient communities.
Thanks for that, Chris. Just first question, kind of what specific measures can be carried out to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I suppose in producing our communities, the big thing is that we're producing energy efficient buildings. So we have south facing glazing. The design is taking advantage of our natural light and the heat from the sun, and high levels of insulation. I suppose the other thing which you've mentioned a number of times there to make them efficient and reduce greenhouse gas emissions is that the movement of people to and from their places where they live and where they work and where they socialise and recreate is close together. So it's that compact development so that we're reducing the CO2 emissions that transport generates, which is a very high percentage of the CO2 or greenhouse gases that we produce. And I suppose the other thing that developments in the county development plan push is that there's far higher use of renewable energies, so that we're using new technologies as they come along, and the technologies that we have, solar panels, and also things like using district heating, so that we are taking the waste heat that would otherwise be wasted CO2 emission or greenhouse gas, and utilising that then to heat our buildings in a more circular way of using our resources efficiently. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chris. And just to raise from a South Dublin perspective, what measures have been taken to move to alternative energy and reduce emissions?
Well, I think Chris has touched on some of the points there, but certainly district heating for Tallaght Centre is imminent now, and that's going to heat thousands of homes from waste energy from a data centre. There's also a second emerging scheme up at Grange Castle, which will support tens of thousands of homes and businesses up in Clonburris. These projects are kind of, particularly the Tallaght Town Centre project is live and imminent. Electrification of all car parking will become standard over the coming period, and I touch again on the compact growth, which is obviously, you know, reduces everything that's needed, and it also facilitates the likes of district heating, because obviously that's much easier to roll out innovative ideas across sensible or sustainable density schemes rather than urban sprawl, which presents a whole different challenge for such infrastructure.
That's great. Thanks for that, Ray. So really the challenge for the next county development plan is to ensure sufficient policies in place to kind of support those projects and kind of roll them out to other areas within the county. Rosaleen, just from your perspective on biodiversity, what role does that have in terms of climate change? You're on mute there, Rosaleen.
Yep. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
No, you're grand.
Yeah, the species and habitats that make up the biodiversity world around us, of course, will be just as affected by climate change as we will be. And while we as humans can make efforts in the way we live to adapt to these changes, like Chris has outlined there, it is harder for species in the natural world to adapt in it the same way. I suppose, for example, as temperatures increase, like the natural tendency for species, particularly those who are temperature sensitive, would be to move further north away from the increasing temperatures. But of course, this movement will be made more difficult if the green corridors aren't there to assist them to move, particularly when they come into the urban environment. And this is where the concept of green infrastructure will be very, very important to assist those species and the different habitats to kind of migrate further north. The other issue, I suppose, that species will face is that as those species are moving north, if those links aren't there, they will die out. And we will see big changes in the types of species that will be more common around us, because as those species move north or die out, further species will be moved to our area here. And so we'll maybe looking at a lot of species that will be termed invasive, and that will take over areas or act in a way that won't be helpful to the way we want to live. So there will be many, many consequences in the environment, in the natural world, which is why we really do have to plan and try and do the best we can.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for that, Rosaleen. And Hazel, just in terms of other areas within the plan to address climate change, can you run us through a few of them?
Yes, Stephen, I think we have touched on some of the key ones here already, and very interesting hearing Rosaleen's comments there. Like one of the things we are doing is we have in fact employed consultants to help us with a green infrastructure strategy. So kind of recognising this whole need to try and create these green corridors, which of course act for biodiversity, and in many cases now are also helping us with our active travel, our cycling and walking, allowing us to do that as well and to enjoy the natural world around us. One of the more difficult things to achieve in a development plan is the whole idea of enhancing accessibility at local level. It's always a bit controversial. So in many cases, we have housing estates which are surrounded by solid boundaries, walls and railings, etc. We could easily have a bus stop right outside those, but people may have to walk a mile or a kilometre or whatever it is to get there, which often means they end up driving. So that is quite a big challenge, I think, for this plan and for us as we move forward in terms of climate change. We must try and allow people to get where they would like to go as easily as they can. And we will try and put some policy into the plan around that. I mean, other issues have been addressed. Obviously, the whole public transport and the transport element of things, we will be putting policy into the plan. Urban design, as Chris said, maximising solar gain and making sure the layout is as positive as possible to reduce the need for fossil fuels. EV charging, there's a lot of work going on that at the moment from all different sections, climate change planning, transport, all looking at that and how we can roll that out successfully and design our new housing so that it can accommodate EV charging, because one of the challenges is where we don't have car parking within the boundary, within the curtilage of a house. How are people able to charge their cars? These are things we have to look at. So I think that's a good flavour of what we have to do. Climate change hits everything in the development plan, and all our policies will be almost audited against it. So I think that's kind of general approach, Stephen.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that, Hazel. And some of the points you made there in relation to sustainable movement bring us on nicely to our next pre-recorded presentation, which was prepared by John Joe Hegarty in our transportation section.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Joe Hegarty, Senior Executive Engineer with South Dublin County Council, and I am delighted to present the sustainable movement issues within the South Dublin County Council Development Plan 2022 to 2028. Sustainable transport helps shape and improve the environment, creating a safer, healthier, more welcoming and connected place, contributing towards the development of sustainable communities. The key transport and movement challenges are economic, environmental and health related. Economic challenges. Road congestion leads to delays, and delays cost money. One of the larger causes of congestion is single occupant car journeys. Public transport is a more efficient means of transporting large numbers of people. The environmental challenges. Increased traffic pollution in the form of nitrogen oxide and carbon monoxide can have long-term health consequences on our citizens. The use of public transport is less polluting per passenger journey. An increase in active modes like walking and cycling is the most environmentally beneficial form of travel. The health and safety challenges. Even moderate amounts of exercise can improve the long-term health outcomes for our citizens. Compact and strategically located growth facilitates sustainable transport in leading to shorter journeys, which can be served by active travel modes. Higher density population can make frequent service public transport financially viable. SDCC shall target growth along good public transport corridors. We use travel demand modelling to analyse existing measured travel information, noting the trends, and using computer modelling to predict the travel network requirements into the future. From this work, travel network weaknesses can be identified, and improvement needs can be prioritised. This helps to target the priority investments we need to make with our finite resources. South Dublin County Council shall be supporting the delivery of 5 rapid transport corridors under the Bus Connects project. The new bus corridors will make journeys faster and more reliable. In addition, 2 modernised and expanded bus terminals at Liffey Valley and Tala shall be constructed. Streamlined ticketing and real-time information will improve commuter journeys. And the existing bus fleet shall be replaced with low-emissions vehicles. South Dublin County Council will be continuing with a comprehensive programme of cycle infrastructure improvements. Additional cycling network will be added, and the existing network will be upgraded to the latest design standards where necessary. This will lead to a safer and more continuous cycle network in South Dublin. And my summary remarks. South Dublin County Council supports compact growth strategically located along transport corridors. Number 2, we aim to improve public transport facilities through the Bus Connects Rapid Transport project. Number 3, SDCC shall improve pedestrian and cycle permeability to desired destinations to shorten trip lengths and encourage active travel. Number 4, we aim to deliver improved pedestrian and cycle infrastructure to make active travel safer and faster in the county. When these actions are implemented, we will be closer to our goal of creating a safer, healthier, connected place, contributing towards development of sustainable communities. I thank you for your attention.
Thanks for that presentation, John Joe. Just following from the previous presentation on climate action and energy, what are the challenges we face in addressing climate change from a transport planning perspective? You touched on a few of them earlier on, but we'll run through some of them again.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, well, single occupant car journeys are the most inefficient and polluting form of travel. Pollutants like nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide are harmful to our health. And public transport is more efficient at transporting large numbers of people and is less polluting per passenger journey. And obviously then active travel is the most environmental form of travel, and so we would encourage that. We have to look at the trip generators, and they are work, school, leisure and retail. And we need to make these journeys shorter by using compact and higher density development. And we can, when we have these alternative infrastructures in place, like cycling infrastructure and public transport routes, we can, I suppose, further reduce car parking spaces and make it more, to encourage further use of the alternatives and rather than the car. And also just like improving the facilities such as good bicycle facilities, secure bicycle parking, changing facilities at workplaces, etc., will all encourage the more active forms of travel. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, John Joe. Thanks for that. Just touching on kind of the issue of movement between places, Suzanne, just are there opportunities from a sustainable movement perspective to use green spaces to create safe and more welcoming pedestrian and cycle corridors within the county?
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, there definitely is. All of our parks and open spaces are open to pedestrians and cyclists, and by providing new public open space in the correct location, it allows us to expand on that network of walking and cycling routes. You'll hear me speak later about the multifunctional nature of open space and you know, how it kind of occupies a variety of functions. And if we can ensure that we're designing those routes so they link people to the places they want to go, it means that as people are walking or cycling to school along these safe routes in parks and open spaces, they can combine active travel with that journey, you know, to their shop, to their local community space, to the school or whatever. And we know during the COVID-19 lockdown and what's going on at the moment, you know, that access to open space is also really important from a health and well-being point of view. So it's just, it all works together really well. Sustainable travel, using the parks and open spaces as shortcuts and links, and just making sure that the open space is part of that placemaking, you know, compact community and neighbourhood. Yeah,
that's great, Suzanne. Thanks for that. And then just Hazel, just going back to the plan again, how can we influence the delivery of sustainable transport modes and provide greater connections to services?
Yes, Stephen, I think speakers probably have addressed this well already, but a key to this is compact growth and ensuring that we have good permeability, as we've discussed before, and connections between one place and another. But part of the work we're doing at the moment in preparation of this development plan is working very closely with the National Transport Authority. And in doing that, we're analysing huge amounts of data in terms of how people travel. So the mode they travel, by bike, walking, public transport, by car, etc. And we're looking at that for each neighbourhood, and we're trying to, I suppose, analyse and work out why, for instance, in some areas there's a greater level of cars being used, and whether there are ways that we can avoid that by putting in perhaps better cycleways. Is there some reason that this is happening that we can actually overcome? So we're doing all that work at the moment, and we would, at the end of that, we would hope to have a clearer picture of what we can do to influence more sustainable travel patterns. And that obviously includes public transport, bus connects, and the routes that they may take as well. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great, Hazel. Thanks for that. I suppose that'll feed into our climate action side of the plan as well, which is great. Our next presentation relates to the topic of community services and parks, and it's been prepared by Brian Hora and Suzanne Furlong.
My name is Brian Hora, and I'm the Senior Executive Officer in the Department of Community, Sport and Recreation. I will begin this presentation by detailing the community aspects of the development plan, and my colleague Suzanne Furlong, Senior Park Superintendent in the Public Realm, will present on issues relating to the strategic provision of parks, open spaces and recreational facilities. A development plan is required to include objectives for the provision of services for the community. This community infrastructure includes services and facilities for community health, well-being and education. Community infrastructure facilities themselves can provide a platform for community and social interaction. Ideally, such facilities will be provided within each area within the county and be accessible to all citizens. Creating a more socially inclusive county by alleviating social exclusion, poverty and deprivation is a challenge which needs to be a policy consideration for all themes within the plan. The integration of planning with the social, community and cultural requirements of an area is one of the considerations which will be important in the making of the development plan. The range of community services across the county is growing. Since 2016, 8 new primary schools and 1 new secondary school have been delivered. Planning permission has also been granted for the expansion of TU Dublin Tala campus. New libraries are being provided in Timon and North Clondalkin. A new swimming pool at Griffin Park in Lucan is under construction, and Part 8 planning has been approved for a new community centre in Saggart. These are all critically important community facilities, and we must ensure provision is made for the future provision of new community facilities in the years ahead to meet the needs of the county.
My name is Suzanne Furlong. I'm going to talk about the provision of parks and recreational facilities. Parks are a fundamental part of the green infrastructure network in South Dublin County, providing habitats for ecological processes, acting as a focal point for active and passive recreation, providing a network of green routes, promoting community interaction and mitigating the impacts of climate change. We are delivering a green infrastructure strategy in tandem with the review of the County Development Plan, which will allow us to identify, protect, enhance and further develop multifunctional open spaces by building an interconnected network of parks, open spaces, woodlands, hedgerows, grasslands, protected areas and rivers and streams. Within our parks, this will ensure a shared space for amenity and recreation, accessibility from local communities, provision of green routes and safer routes to school, biodiversity protection, flood management and adaptation to climate change. The County Development Plan allows us to plan the location and provision of new parks and open spaces. It allows us to deliver the best design for those parks and open spaces, to balance protection of the existing environment and natural amenity with the provision for active and passive recreation. This review helps us to identify the need for parks and recreational facilities over the lifetime of the next development plan and allows us to properly plan and deliver that future requirement.
Thanks to Brian and Suzanne for preparing that presentation. Unfortunately, Brian couldn't be with us today, but we have Paul McIlerney who's going to answer the questions from the community side. And Paul, just in terms of the community department's function, how do they decide where to locate new facilities? And are there any new facilities planned over the coming years?
Good morning, Stephen. How are you? I suppose that the first thing to say is that the provision of community facilities is vitally important to the life of the county and the quality of life of the residents. The social, community and cultural requirements of an area is a key consideration and vitally important in the plan making process. When we're looking at areas for new facilities, there's probably two key considerations. The first is to look and see what existing facilities are in the area. It's very important to protect, enhance, modernise and expand those facilities, and also then to complement those with new facilities if they're required, especially for new areas experiencing significant growth. When we plan a new area, you have to look at the demographic trends in terms of population numbers, the growth of the population, and also then the age profile and demographic profile. Looking at the age, is going to be a young population? Is it going to be active age, a high number of active age citizens? And also very conscious of the integration and diversity of the population, and having facilities there that'll take care of all those needs. In terms of the actual facility, they should be flexible, multi-purpose, respond to the needs at the time of construction, but also to be flexible to respond to needs on future trends. In terms of new facilities, we have got a large portfolio of community facilities across the county at the moment, but I suppose the very exciting development is the Lucan swimming pool, which now is under construction. The next one coming down the pipeline is the Sagard Community Centre, which is in the heart of the Sagard village. It was an old primary school that the council bought, and now we have plans now to have a multi-purpose facility there, which will meet the needs of the Sagard village and surrounding area.
Brilliant.
In terms of future, I suppose the main one would be Fortunestown coming down the line now, housing development plan there. So there's preliminary discussions in planning the developers and community regarding the community facilities to meet the needs of our population.
That's great, Paul. Thanks for that. And Therese, just in terms of placemaking, do community facilities play a key role in the delivery of great places?
I suppose it depends on how you define facilities, but community centres, for example, are not the only component, but obviously can contribute in a really positive way. Other key components are high quality streets, parks with easy accessible, safe and well monitored connections and links for pedestrians, and then obviously play spaces and all that, as well as quality commercial offering, which is obviously also important, coffee shops, that kind of stuff, nice boutiques. The key to the space is that where people, the key is that where the spaces feel welcoming and comfortable, that's where successful spaces come from. And I suppose taking the idea that lively use is the success of it. More recent community centres such as Ballycrack Community Centre have looked at a much higher intensity of use, and where there's space for adult education, health, well-being and flexible spaces which can kind of cater for larger and smaller community gatherings. The buildings are working harder to create more vibrancy, and generally we're looking to deliver cafe spaces within these centres, as well as associated outside facilities like playgrounds and teen spaces and all those good things.
Great. Thanks for that, Therese. Thanks for that. John Joe, just Brian mentioned in the presentation that the location of community facilities and services need to be accessible. From a transport perspective, what measures can we take to ensure ease of access to such facilities from pedestrian and cycle perspective? You're just on mute there, John Joe, sorry.
So excuse me, off here. That's it.
Yeah,
now.
perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's been touched on before, but community services need to be on good public transport links. They need to be close to residential developments. There needs to be good permeability in the directions of the community facilities, such as footpath links, cycle links, etc. But we need to ensure that we look at the desire lanes, the routes that people will take to get to these, and safety audit them in terms of, is there crossings, is there good junctions, and what are the active travel infrastructure along those routes, and does it need to be improved? The other aspect that hasn't been mentioned at the minute, but is very important, is that we have to look from a mobility impaired point of view in terms of the access for that group of people, and things like adapted parking spaces close to the amenities is one example of that, and it would be a part of our policies to do those sorts of elements. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, John Joe. Thanks for that. Suzanne, you mentioned in your presentation, and you touched on it earlier on, the green infrastructure strategy that's going to be carried out as part of the plan. Can you explain what this is for everyone tuning in, and what are the expected outcomes?
Okay, we're carrying out this green infrastructure strategy in tandem with the review of the county development plan, and we're really delighted because it's a very appropriate time to do it. Basically, green infrastructure is the entire network of parks, open spaces, private gardens, agricultural fields, forestries up in the Dublin Mountains and elsewhere, woodlands. It's not just the green open spaces, but also the blue open spaces as well, rivers, streams, ditches. It's really important from a county point of view that we get a handle on where it is and which bits of it are most important, because in order for flora and fauna to survive, they need to be able to move along those corridors. And you can imagine there's not much point in having loads of pollinators if the pollinator insects can't get to them, So having them all connected makes that network really strong and really adaptable to climate change and things like that. So we're carrying out this review of the green infrastructure in the county. It also see where it links to green infrastructures in counties surrounding us, so we'll have that kind of regional look at things, and that will allow us to, and we'll also map the habitats that are in our county. That will allow us to see what's important to protect. It'll feed into the core strategy for the county development plan, so we'll know, what we should be zoning in what quantities and where, and also within zoned areas, even if it's zoned as residential or commercial or whatever, are there particular bits of green infrastructure that are important to protect during the development of those sites? And so it'll give us some really key information, and we'd really appreciate if people, if they're submitting to the county development plan review, would let us know about things in their own area that they consider important from that point of view. It also helps us to plan for that multifunctional aspect of open space, and public open space in particular, that we've spoken about. So for instance, ecological corridors such as rivers and so on are really also useful from a greenway point of view, walking and cycling. So that's kind of the infrastructure side of things. It's protection of the environment, but it's also allowing the ecosystem services to be delivered as well as part of the green infrastructure strategy.
That's great. Thanks for that, Suzanne. And just back to you, Hazel, in terms of the plan again, what measures can the plan put in place to ensure that all communities in South Dublin have access to a range of facilities to adequately meet their needs?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I think Suzanne has made a very good case for the whole green infrastructure, and that's part of what the development plan is going to be working on, and to have that strategy in place as part of the whole review of the development plan is really important. As we've spoken about so many times now, the whole idea of compact growth helps obviously accessibility, because we can have so many more living services, employment, all in closer proximity and increasing accessibility. But what the development plan will do is going to review the standards that we have currently. So for instance, we are already looking at our open space standards and whether they're kind of best practice and best for South Dublin. And what do we do at times when we're trying to regenerate land, so this existing brownfield land which wouldn't have open space around it. And as we regenerate, we want to make sure that we have zoned or sought open space, and that as development comes in, that we have standards there that we can apply as we're assessing planning applications to make sure that these things are delivered. And equally, another thing we're doing at the moment is what we call a social infrastructure audit. So we're looking at all the different types of social infrastructure that we have in the county. We're looking at that against the population that we have now and that we will expect to have as we grow, and making sure that we will have, again, the appropriate standards to make sure that we can deliver new community and other facilities as they're required. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks for that, Hazel. And thanks to everyone's input there on that discussion topic. Our next presentation relates to the topic of economic development and employment, and is being prepared by Laura Leonard.
Economic development and employment is about delivering improvement to the quality of life and living standards for the people of the county. Although the situation at present is unprecedented with the ongoing impact of COVID-19, planning for future economic development and new jobs for a growing population is essential, and the new development plan will set the framework to achieve this. Economic activity and associated employment is a cornerstone of progress for our county, and this development plan requires us to do a number of things. Firstly, to identify locations in the county that are the most suitable for further large-scale industry and business, and to ensure that there is a sufficient supply of such zoned and serviced land to keep the county competitive for investment into the future. Grange Castle Business Park in the west of the county has been successful in this regard and has been expanded to provide high quality jobs for the future. Also, to examine the potential for additional employment through renewal of older, existing but underused industrial areas. Also, to support and encourage enterprise and innovation by providing facilities at appropriate locations and to support the growth of SMEs. And to develop tourist attractions, greenways, heritage assets and leisure facilities with a view to increasing the number of jobs in the tourism and leisure sectors. To best inform the next development plan, a review of the location and quantum of existing employment and related zoned lands and the profile of employment by sector in the county will be undertaken. Additional or variations to zoning types and locations can be considered to best deliver for the future needs of a population predicted to increase by 50,000 by the year 2031. And this will have regard to planned residential development zones. The opportunity to regenerate brownfield or older industrial areas will be considered for future combined enterprise, commercial, office and residential development to get the maximum benefit from already existing and adjacent public transport and infrastructure links. And in this way, compact urban growth and sustainable communities can be achieved. It is important to provide for a diverse range of employment types to accommodate the range of skills and qualifications. Retail and tourism are significant sectors within the broader economy, and South Dublin has the retail centres of Liffey Valley and the Square Tala, as well as a number of town and district centres. We must consider the impact that the new way of shopping is and will have on existing retail outlets and the impact any such change may have on our town centres. Agriculture is part of the South Dublin economy, so the development plan needs policies to support agriculture and to ensure jobs potential is realised as farming diversifies. An assessment of the likely trends in existing and new employment types over the next 6 to 10 years, taking account of global and national economic scenarios, will inform the plan. In conclusion, the objective of the development plan is to secure sustained progress for South Dublin County Council with regard to economic development and to provide for the employment needs of the population.
Thanks for that, Laura. Just in terms of economic growth, what's the focus in the county and how are the council encouraging new investment?
So our main focus is to build on what we have and then to develop in areas where we feel there's potential. So Grange Castle, as was mentioned in the presentation, has a proven track record at this stage and has been there for 20 years, and the existing park, in fact, is almost built out fully, with all of the client companies having expanded over the years and created additional jobs. So we have an additional 500 zoned acres now, and we are at present starting the process of servicing that land, because what we find really essential to attract both the inward foreign investment and also to encourage Indigenous investment is the service sites where the utilities are available, energy and infrastructure, heat, electricity, and all of the various utilities are available, and that in itself attracts the investment for the future. And we have a number of projects underway at the present time in that regard. But in addition to that, we have a strong focus in developing and supporting innovation. And our LEO, our local enterprise office, is very strongly involved in supporting innovation, developing innovation in our county, and in examining the potential to expand our tourism and leisure sectors with the view to increasing the number of jobs in both of those areas.
That's great. Thanks for that, Laura. And John Joe, just in terms of the employment growth centres, how do we ensure that they're accessible so that we live close to where we work and reduce our need to travel?
Yes, thanks, Stephen. I suppose there's a couple of things here that we need to balance. We need to get workers to and from the place of employment, and we need to get the goods and services to the market. There are certain types of industry that may be not suitable to be close to residential, and we have to take account of that. It's better for these manufacturing type employment to be close on regional and national roads to get it close, to get these goods to market. Balanced with that, there are some employments that are more suitable to be closer to residential, and obviously we've talked about closeness to the residential being an important factor in the mode of travel choice. In terms of the building of industrial estates, you know, it to encourage, obviously, all the facilities being built up front can encourage employment to come to an area. And then we've already touched on, you know, the backup infrastructure to employment centres, such as the cycling lanes, the built on bus corridors is a better solution, and also that you know, the other aspect then is perhaps looking at shift working, which we haven't really talked about. From a transport point of view, this is an important aspect, because one of the biggest problems in transport is what we call the peak hours of 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock and 4 o'clock to 6 p.m. And employment that is shift-based can perhaps move away and move some of the movements away from those peak hours. And that's important for us to look at. We also, you know, when development is happening, we have policies to encourage car sharing initiatives by the employer. And we've already talked about caps on car parking and the encouragement of a mobility plan as part of any planning application to encourage a better mix and a better choice of travel mode to employment. So thanks.
Thanks for that, John Joe. And I suppose that leads us into you, Chris, kind of in terms of the climate change perspective. And are there particular issues that we should be conscious of as we seek to grow our employment base within the county?
Yes, Stephen, I suppose a number of them have been mentioned already, and one of the big one is that mobility of people and making that as efficient as possible. So where we can have people close to public transport links, or ideally where industry allows that we have the people living close to where they work, and that cycling and walking is an option. So that should always be, I suppose, the top priority, that movement of people is made as efficient and as climate less carbon producing and as least carbon impacting as possible. I suppose the other things about it is that we would be looking to do things for the last mile, the last delivery delivery mile, that we're looking at other options there like cargo bikes to reduce the number of vehicles that are moving cargo around the city, and things like electric vehicles. So again, those noxious fumes and pollutants that are coming out from our predominantly up to now diesel vehicles in doing deliveries in urban areas and in our towns, that we have alternatives for those when it comes to EV charging facilities, and making those other options viable, but while still being able to maintain our economy and our businesses and their services that they provide. I suppose then from the businesses themselves, making sure that they will run their processes as efficiently as possible. So we've got energy efficient businesses using resources in a sustainable way, and that we encourage them and we can help them with what facilities are needed for them to achieve those high standards. So I suppose there would be a couple of the bigger things. The other option, I suppose, is that, or the other option that's out there for companies is there are opportunities coming with climate change. There are new technologies, sustainable energy technologies, district heating becoming a new thing in Ireland. So there's opportunities for businesses to get into these new industries that climate change is creating. So there are some opportunities there for companies too. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chris. And Hazel, just from the planning side of things, kind of how can we, within the plan, facilitate new jobs within the county?
Yes, Stephen, I think, again, we've touched on this, but one of the most important things, and this is set out in a number of research documents, including the National Enterprise 2025, is this whole need to deliver places that are attractive to both employers and employees. So especially with FDI, when they come to our county, they want to be very clear that their employees will want to live here or they'll want to work here. So we have to be able to deliver. Essentially, we're back to good placemaking, places that people want to live. So another thing, obviously, that we need is to have sufficient land zoned and to have it zoned in the right places. And John Joe touched on this, where there's certain types of development which is more appropriate in certain places. So we'll be looking to put more office-based development closer to residential. Bigger warehouse type uses really don't need to be right in city centre sort of areas, or you know, closer to the city centre in general. And this is very much a part of this whole regeneration land, and what we do with the existing businesses that are there that might be better somewhere else, and how we got the land zoned to relocate these businesses if that becomes necessary. Another thing that we really, and we're doing research on this at the moment in terms of developing policy for the plan, is to be aware of the likely trends and the needs of business as we go into the future, and ensuring that our policy adequately reflects their needs. So that's something we're working on at the moment, and we'll work with businesses on that as well. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great. Thanks for that, Hazel. We'll now move on to our final presentation on heritage and biodiversity, which has been prepared by Rosaleen Dwyer, our Heritage Officer.
Hello. As Heritage Officer with South Dublin County Council, my role focuses on the promotion of 4 main heritage topics. These include our natural heritage, our built heritage, our archaeological and historical heritage, and also our cultural heritage, and that includes both tangible and intangible culture. For today's presentation, however, I will only be focusing on just one of those topics, our natural heritage. So what is biodiversity? Biodiversity is a term that is used to describe the enormous variety of life on the planet. This includes not only all the plants, animals, birds, insects, bacteria, and yes, of course, viruses too. But it also describes how all of these things interact with one another to form habitats and different ecosystems. And of course, it also it describes how we interact with all of those habitats and ecosystems also. Why does biodiversity matter? Well, as a species, we rely on the natural world for many of the basic requirements that we need to survive. We refer to these basic requirements as ecosystem services, and these services would include basics such as food, medicines, and raw materials. We also benefit from other services that nature provides, such as the insects that pollinate our food crops, and the habitats like woodlands, boglands, and wetlands that help to cleanse our air and our water. and how to regulate temperature and climate. And also, as many of us appreciated over the last few months, our health and well-being is significantly supported and boosted by being outdoors in the natural world. So, given how important biodiversity is to us, and given that the county needs to continue to grow and develop, and again, given how biodiversity is under significant pressure at the moment, the big challenge is to find ways to protect, enhance, and to restore biodiversity wherever we can, while also supporting the necessary development of communities and employment opportunities. One way that we can work towards achieving this delicate balance is to try and investigate a green infrastructure approach for the new county development plan. The term green infrastructure describes an interconnecting network of green spaces around the county. That would include features like parks, the canal, the river systems, woodlands, the uplands, fields, hedgerows, and of course private gardens. So as part of the development plan process, the council is currently developing a green infrastructure strategy, which will operate side by side with important development objectives, offering significant opportunities for biodiversity to thrive, while also, of course, benefiting the human residents in the county. Finding ways to retain and incorporate biodiversity and green infrastructure into our everyday lives will not only support nature, but will also put firm foundations under our own future development as a county. To assist with this process, a biodiversity action plan for the county is currently being finalised, which will assist with identifying specific actions and projects to be undertaken to help protect and enhance biodiversity into the future.
That's great. Thanks for that, Rosaleen. Just one of the things that always comes up, why is biodiversity important to humans, and what is an ecosystem services approach?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, well, as the presentation said there, we rely centrally on biodiversity for our own survival. It supplies most of the food we eat, the medicines, raw materials, and it provides what we call ecosystem services. And while that might be a bit of a buzzword at the moment, what it really is all about is it's about looking at the natural processes that operate in the natural world, and to recognise how much we benefit from them, and then by putting in measures to protect these ecosystem services so that we're actually protecting our own future as well. I suppose, for example, pollinating insects are key to ensuring a safe food supply for us into the future, seeing as they pollinate most of our own food crops. So one way we can help protect ourselves is by protecting this free service or this ecosystem service. And we do that by identifying the existing flower-rich areas throughout the county, or we can create new areas, of course. And those areas then we would manage for their flowering species, allowing the grass to grow and allowing the flowers to flower and set seed, and then cutting the grass and taking it away. And in this way, we are supporting the pollinating insects by providing them with the food, and by doing that, we are actually ensuring our own food security into the future. So that's really what the ecosystem service approach is like, is about. I suppose the other example that we would have heard earlier from Chris is in relation to our rivers and streams ecosystems. These help to regulate water flow through the county and help cleanse the waters. And these wetland systems are very important to identify in advance of development and to ensure that we protect those into the future. Obviously, we're also protecting biodiversity when we're doing this, but primarily we're protecting the biodiversity that supports our futures.
That's great. Thanks for that, Rosaleen. Suzanne, just in terms of how do we plan for new parks and ensure the protection of natural heritage?
Thanks, Stephen. I suppose the key there is location, really. So it's important that we basically plan where the open spaces and parks are going to be, and then within those open spaces and parks, what facilities are going to be provided. And I know we've already spoken about the GI strategy, but that'll give us that high level information along with other other investigations we'll be doing as well, that allow us to see, well, how much open space do we require as part of the county development plan? Where should it be? And then within those parks and open spaces, how are they designed to ensure that the sensitive locations are protected, and that, say, the active recreation, for instance, is located away from the areas that are sensitive to that sort of activity. I suppose from a natural heritage point of view within our parks, it really relates to the multifunctional aspect of it. And one of the functions of the open space and parks is actually protection of the environment as well, that we consider to be really, really important. So not just, I suppose it relates to delivery of the parks and open spaces. So, how much we need and where it goes, but then also the operation of that park and open space, how we can enhance those areas going forward. So over the last number of years, and working with Rosaleen as well, we've been looking at enhancing the pollinator areas within our parks, putting in meadowlands, looking at wetlands, reinforcing existing hedgerows, kind of getting those corridors connecting, because you can imagine, delivery of a park within a development site or a park within a zoned area is a really important linking element of green infrastructure. So, a park that goes from one side of a development to another and linking to a wider GI network is really, really important in order to protect and enhance natural biodiversity in the area.
That's great. Thanks for that, Suzanne. Chris, does natural heritage play a role in mitigation or adaptation to climate change?
I suppose natural heritage is one of those areas where it actually does both. I suppose from a mitigation point of view, all our hedgerows and trees, as they grow, they sequester carbon, so they're sucking carbon out of the atmosphere, which is a challenge that we're obviously trying to do in many other ways, but it's done for us by nature. So by protecting the hedgerows and the woodlands that we have and expanding them where we can, it's making that challenge, it's helping us on that challenge of reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. I suppose on the other side of it then, on adaptation, again, depending where they are, they can have a big benefit to us in being more resilient to the extreme weather that climate change is bringing to us, particularly along riverbanks where they're protecting erosion and protecting land from washing down the rivers. Proper planting along those areas and the natural growth that's there already plays a big part in that. Obviously, in areas where it might be prone to landslide, again, the planting ties the ground together and protects the land and protects us from the more extreme outcomes that can happen from the extreme rainfall and the wind and the extreme weather events that are happening. So I suppose they play a very important part in helping us both on the mitigation side in the carbon challenge, but also on the adaptation side and helping us be more resilient to the extremes that are coming our way with climate change. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chris. And then Hazel, finally, just what role does the development plan have when it comes to the environment, and how will progress be monitored?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I suppose when we're looking at the development plan, we're looking at sort of three big key pillars. We have the social pillar, economic pillar, and the environment pillar. And all the time we're trying to balance those three because obviously at times there's conflict between them. As we grow, we're encroaching on the more natural environment. And what we try to do is make sure that to the best extent possible, we're protecting the most important parts of our environment and allowing our county to grow and allowing us to live in a very positive, good place. But and obviously that's all relating back to our health and our well-being and to good placemaking, all of which we've discussed quite a bit this morning. In parallel with the development plan process, what we do is we carry out environmental assessments. So we've at least three, but we have what's called a strategic environmental assessment. We have an appropriate assessment under the Habitats Directive, and we do a strategic flood risk assessment. And those assessments all influence and inform the plan and what we do in the plan. The strategic environmental assessment in particular will come out at the end with indicators, and we will monitor those indicators over the lifetime of the plan. And that's essentially the key way in which we'll monitor the environmental impacts of the plan.
That's great. Thanks for that, Hazel. So that concludes our 7 strategic issues. We'll now move on to the open Q&A, and we have a few questions which have come in to put to the panel. The first one's back to you, Hazel, again, relating to the issue of smaller housing units. Will there be consideration to smaller housing units? And is there legislation that bound South Dublin County Council's planning from allowing micro housing, or is it just a policy?
Yeah, Stephen, this is an interesting one, and obviously this whole kind of micro housing, as it's called, is a very particular type of development. It isn't facilitated in most development plans at the moment, and there are reasons for that, in part because we have to adhere to government guidelines, what we call Section 28 guidelines, which set out standards for the size of housing, and in most cases micro housing fits in below that. It's something we can look at, but we are bound by national policy on that one.
Okay, that's great, Hazel. Thanks for that. And just one for you, Therese, just in relation to the presentation on built environment and placemaking. It mentioned the creation of more interesting and legible neighbourhoods. What does this mean, and do you have any examples of how this is being carried out and achieved in the county?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all know what an attractive town centre looks like, but I suppose the challenge is what shape does it take when we move away from it just being based on houses or apartments, and how do we get more integrated models which reflect all of the different typologies that we're talking about here, and the model of compact growth. Earlier sections of Adamstown delivered on this. It has a cohesive town centre, a wide range of dwellings addressing larger and smaller streets and public spaces, and it's supported by good infrastructure. And I think the challenges and the lessons learned as to how we retain that throughout various economic cycles, and how we keep focus on that, is part of the lessons learned that's going into the revised development plan. Yep.
That's great. Thanks, Therese. Just one for you, Hazel, in relation to population growth. Have South Dublin County Council identified areas within the region to build centres so to encourage shorter journeys? So I suppose kind of how do we grow the county and ensure that we can travel short distances to employment and facilities within the county?
Yep, Stephen, a part of the development plan is to develop what's called the core strategy, and that will set out a settlement hierarchy for the county. But as we've outlined already, there are key growth centres, and these are set out in our regional spatial strategy. And they include Adamstown and Clonburris, and obviously both of those are along a rail line and have good public transport, and will have increased public transport as Clonburris builds out. And equally, we have Tala, and I know I think some of that question was around saying we don't have a natural centre. I suppose being just on that kind of city edge, this is almost inevitable. But Tala is our capital town, and has services and facilities, employment, residential, etc., all within easy reach. So there's some of our key growth areas, and what we shouldn't forget as well is that the existing built-up areas will take some infill development, and that will be part of the challenge as we go forward. We are obliged under the national and regional planning frameworks and strategies to put 50% of our new development within the built-up area. So that is something that we have to do, and obviously within those areas, accessibility to the various facilities is available. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great. Thanks for that, Hazel. And we have a question in relating to the use of pocket forests to help urban areas. I'll put that one to you, Suzanne. We see examples in different cities in Europe relating to kind of urban forests and things like that. Is it something that's on the South Dublin agenda?
Hi, Stephen, thanks. Trees in urban areas have a lot of benefits. I suppose they capture carbon, they mitigate the effects of climate change. We're looking at using tree pits in urban areas as a type of sustainable urban drainage, which is we're quite excited about. Kilcarbery are one of the areas that we're trying to roll this out in. That would allow us to intercept surface water, clean it and percolate it to groundwater or to other attenuation areas, ideally groundwater if we can. plan in order to replenish those stocks. I mean, the other thing about trees in urban areas is they have a huge visual amenity, and they also have been shown under some studies to increase property prices, which I'm sure people would be delighted with. But I think increasingly it allows us to mitigate that urban heat island effect. And, you know, we don't realise at the moment how much, you know, until you go to another country and, you know, you're standing under a tree in a very, very hot environment, you know, what a relief that is, especially for people that are perhaps more sensitive to heat. And I think as climate change develops, that'll become more and more important. So we do need to plan for that now. I think it's important that the county development plan policies support us the provision of trees within new developments and within urban areas. The practical delivery of that, I think it's important that we would plan for that as well. And the appropriate place for that is it within our tree management policies. We have, South Dublin County Council does have a Living with Trees strategy, which is our tree management policy for trees in public open areas and public spaces and public realm in general, and that will actually be reviewed very shortly. And I think you know, it's appropriate that be done around the same time as the county development plan review as well. So I think in the county development plan, high level policies that support it, and then in the tree management policies that we make sure that we have you know, really strong policies and practical ways of delivering it.
That's great. Thanks for that, Suzanne. And just one for you, Chris, in regards to climate action. What is the role of communities, and what does community resilience mean in practical terms?
Yeah, Stephen, I suppose there's probably two parts really to that, and I suppose the role of communities really is like all of society. We all have a role to adapt newer ways of doing everything, from, you know, taking up the challenge to get out of our car and use public transport, or get out and walk and cycle, to doing things more efficiently around our own homes, and looking at more efficient ways of using energy to reduce the amount of carbon that we're all putting out there into the atmosphere. And there are I suppose ways that communities could come together to do that. The Sustainable Energy Communities is run by SAI, and South Dublin is involved in that. That's a great vehicle for people to come together as a community and look at energy projects that reduce the amount of energy that their community or their locality is creating, and take on projects to use new technologies or do things in a new way to help that. I suppose the other half of that question really is in relation to community resilience. I suppose that's really a description of how communities can make themselves more resilient to what's happening with extreme weather and the changes that climate change are bringing. And I think, you know, in practical terms, that's probably about being prepared. You'll see areas, particularly in some counties like Cork, where they've had terrible rain lately. Communities have had to become resilient to make sure they have their sandbags ahead of time, and that all the drains in their locality that they're keeping an eye on, and if they're able to clear them, they're clearing them, or if they need to be in contact with the local authority, that they're getting in contact with them, and they're another pair of eyes watching the rivers and streams to keep on top of those. And then I suppose at an individual basis, houses that are prone to flooding, there are, you know, flood gates and flood doors and certain non-return valves that people can have fitted on their own drainage systems to ensure that they're protecting themselves in as much as possible for these extreme events. So I suppose that's kind of what the community resilient term is about. It's about making communities, you know, doing what can be as resilient as they can to these changes that climate change are bringing, particularly on the weather side. Thanks, Stephen.
That's great. Thanks for that, Chris. John Joe, just one for you. Will each of our villages and housing areas be linked together with cycle tracks, but within each area and to each other? And does the viewers raising kind of an example in France where there's some really good examples of this?
Yes, Stephen. Well, the National Cycling Plan lays out a network of proposals of primary cycle connections and secondary and feeder connections. So there is plans underway to connect up the main centres, town centres, etc., with cycling facilities. I also mentioned earlier in my presentation that we will be modelling travel demand, and the answers that come out of that will show where the directions of travel are going, and then we can look at our existing infrastructure in those directions and see if there are capacity issues or gaps that need to be filled or improvements that need to be made. And The results of that those factual answers will be used to make our programme choices and the construction that we will make during the next plan. I want some of the questions that have come in just on these issues. We encourage submissions to be made, but I would encourage that they're detailed and specific, and that your submissions maybe add photos and sketches of the particular issues that you have at certain junctions or certain places where you feel there is a lack of infrastructure that we need to address. And that'll certainly help us pinpoint, and we'll add that to our assessment going forward. So thanks, Stephen.
That's great. Thanks for that, John Joe. That's actually one of the questions for you, Hazel. How much consultation with the community will be carried out as part of the plan review process?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Well, this is, as we know, the first public consultation phase lasting 8 weeks. It's one of 3 consultation phases over the entire period of the plan. But this one is the one about, I'd say, kind of the direction that the plan will take and the big issues. So what we've done for consultation this plan, and we're very much aware of COVID, and it's restricted what we would have done traditionally in terms of consultation. So what we've done is we have 2 webinar sessions. This is the first one, and the next one is on the 16th of September. We've also set up a dedicated website which allows for, it has a virtual meeting room. You can make submissions directly linked from that website, and we'd very much encourage you all to make submissions, as that's the only formal way to get your views to us. We also have articles in weekly newspapers, and we set out various tweets and other information through social media. We have a news page on our website, and we will have some stakeholder meetings, and we'll include the public participation network on that, which is obviously community based again. So we have a lot of consultation ongoing. I say I would very much encourage you to make a submission and to engage with us, and our webpage is a really good place to start on that. Thanks, Steve.
That's great. Thanks, Hazel. And we'll display some of that information before we finish up today. Rosaline, this question has come in relating to will geoheritage be included as part of policy as the underlying element on which biodiversity is based? Will there be policy included promoting geoheritage sites for planning consideration as well as tourism and education?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, we have objectives already in our current development plan for our geological sites, where we list the sites that we have identified as being important for their geological heritage. And again, in association with that, there would be the objectives to promote and encourage people to understand what the geological sites are all about. And yeah, there is a significant link between the geology of the county and our biodiversity. Plants grow in particular locations, particular ground conditions, particular soil conditions. And that's one of the main reasons that we actually have such really good pollinator sites in this county, because of the geology. So they are all intertwined, and absolutely an aspect of geoheritage will certainly be included in the development plan.
That's great. Thanks for that, Rosaline. Just one for you, Laura, on the economic side. Significant growth in population will require additional employment opportunities to serve new residents within the county. Keeping these employment opportunities within the county will be an important part of the new plan.
Yes, indeed, and that's centrally important to us as part of the wider Dublin region. That poses advantages, I suppose, and some challenges. Advantages insofar as we are very accessible to airports, ports and national infrastructure. Those are all important drivers of inward investment. And I suppose a challenge insofar as we have neighbouring counties who may also boast such advantages. However, our strategy has been and will continue to be, and this will be very much harnessed within the new plan, to have available the sites, to build on the track record that we have, and to work closely with the IDA, as we have done, in developing Grange Castle Business Park. So absolutely, the plan will, I suppose, really clearly set out how we propose and what we need to do to ensure that we can meet for the employment needs of the increased population and we can provide those jobs within the county.
That's great. Thanks for that, Laura. Just one for you, Hazel. We touched on it earlier on in regard to movement patterns and the social infrastructure audit and the background to that. Can you just provide a bit more information on the methodology, required inputs and timing of these audits?
Yeah, Stephen. So basically, we're looking in detail at the movement patterns within the county, and as I mentioned before, we're working with the NTA on that. The data comes from the 2016 census and what's called POUSCAR data, which is essentially about the movement patterns, and we're looking at, as I say, huge amounts of data on that for our own county and the movement within and without the county, but also internally within the different neighbourhoods. In terms of the kind of the timing of them, they're ongoing, and the reason for them is to inform policy as we prepare our development plan. So basically, the findings of these will inform our policy in the plan. And the social infrastructure audit, again, we are using from South Dublin's knowledge and indeed the Department of Education, who we're liaising with, ongoing liaison with them in terms of schools. We're looking at all of the different types of social infrastructure across the county, where it is, in numbers and how it's serving the population, and how critically how it can serve future populations, and identifying gaps. And essentially that's what that audit will do. And again, that will inform policy in our plan as we move forward.
Thanks for that, Hazel. Just another question for you again, just in relation to, I suppose, just to explain the role of the councillors in the plan making process. Yeah,
the viewer has indicated county councillors are ultimately responsible for making the development plan. So what will happen from now on is that the chief executive essentially will draft or make a draft plan and present it to the councillors, who then make decisions on that and decide whether it goes out as is or whether changes are made to it, and it'll go on public display in July of next year. But one of I know the questions is, are councillors sufficiently trained? And the answer is that there's increasing training, and the Office of the Planning Regulator is running regular training sessions, and we're encouraging our county councillors to engage with those training sessions. There's one coming up now on this stage of the development plan, and I think it's all very, very timely for us and for our councillors, as we are in the same stages of preparing the plan as the training is being tailored to. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks for that, Hazel. Just one for you, Suzanne, again. In order to compensate for compact housing in terms of private outdoor space, will South Dublin County Council pursue a policy of encouraging allotments by making space available in association with new housing?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Well, I suppose it kind of covers three types of open spaces there. I suppose the county development plan is important, first of all, to ensure there's an adequate provision of private open space, you know, as appropriate to the type of housing that's being delivered. Within the public open space, then we provide allotments. We've over 400 in the county as it is, and we would look to increase that. One of the actions under the Climate Change Action Plan is actually to encourage local food production, and we'd see allotments as a key part of that. There's also some community gardens in the county, and I think the other side of it would be the semi-private or communal open spaces within developments. Now, I suppose it depends on, you know, the people who are living within each area. You know, is it what they want? Is it suitable to their lifestyles and you know how busy they are? But local food production is definitely something that people are getting more and more interested in. We are getting requests for allotments and provision of same all the time. So I think it's important that the county development plan would have policies that support not only the multifunctional public open space that I've spoken about, but also within those communal semi-private areas within developments, that the design of those can accommodate things like local food production and that's appropriate to the development that it's in.
That's great. Thanks for that, Suzanne. I think we've gone through all the questions now, and I suppose we've addressed a lot of them as we've gone through each of the presentations. I'd just like to thank everyone on our panel for participating today in today's webinar, and to Ben, John and Tracy who've been working away in the background. Hazel, I'll just pass over to you if you have any kind of final comments you'd like to make.
Thanks, Stephen. No, I'd just like to thank everybody, all presenters and those behind the scenes doing all the work on this, but most importantly, I'd like to thank those who have joined the webinar today and have shown such an interest in South Dublin County Council and its development and the preparation of the development plan. Very much encourage all of you to make submissions, and as we said, and Stephen has just put up the details there. This can be done through a variety of ways, our website and on the Consult South Dublin website as well. So once again, thank you very much, and thank you for your questions, and I hope that we've answered them to your satisfaction. Thank you.
Thanks, Hazel. So we'll just run through briefly again. Hazel touched on some of them earlier on. Our next webinar will take place on the 16th of September at 7 p.m. The closing date for submissions is the 28th of September, and you'll see the link on your screen for how to access the consultation portal. As Hazel mentioned, our virtual consultation room on our website facilitates direct access to the planning team over the phone. So if you have any questions or queries during the consultation period, feel free to use that facility. We're also facilitating meetings by appointment every Tuesday afternoon from 1 to 4 p.m. And we will be running an open consultation event in Tala Library on Thursday, the 17th of September from 2 to 5 p.m. So that concludes our first webinar event. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and engaging in the plan making process. I hope you found it informative, and we look forward to receiving your submissions. Have a nice day. Thank you.